Hello everybody and welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. In today's video, I'm going to be taking some underused or underpowered Warlock exotics and updating them to bring them a little more in line with what other exotics can do. But before we get started, I'd like to clarify a few things. As a disclaimer, this particular list of exotics came about from my own experience playing Destiny 2. All of the exotics on this list were chosen for one or all of the following reasons. Either A, I don't see it in the wild very often, B, I think this exotic encroaches on another exotic's niche, or C, I think there's just a small update that this exotic could use to make it a little more viable in content. And as a side note, that is not to say that any of these exotics are bad exotics, because I really don't think there's such a thing as a bad exotic. Every single exotic in Destiny 2 has its use cases and its niches, and players all around the world are going to figure out how to make them work with their builds. The goal is not to overhaul these exotics entirely, but rather to add or tweak these exotics in ways that either better define their own niche, or give them a slight lethality bump to bring them in line with what other exotics can do. And just as a reminder guys, I am not a game dev in the slightest. I will not pretend like these are 100% balanced in the sandbox. But that being said, I did my best to balance them in both PvP and PvE when I updated and tuned these exotics. And as always guys, all of these changes are just my opinion. If there's an exotic you love on this list, it does not mean that it's bad in any stretch of the imagination. These are just changes that I would like to propose in order to better carve out this exotic's niche. Also, before we got started, I wanted to shout out a couple members of my clan that helped me vet these ideas and make sure they weren't too busted. So a big shout out to my clanmates Seawalker, Bat, Pearl, and Drew. These guys were super key in helping me formulate these ideas and making sure they weren't too overpowered, so big thanks to them when I was putting together this video. With those ground rules out of the way, let's jump into our first Warlock exotic. Kicking us off, we have the Eye of Another World, which comes with the perk Cerebral Uplink. This perk reads, highlights priority targets and improves the regeneration speed of your grenade, melee, and rift abilities. Provides a small benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. Eye of Another World is the jack-of-all-trades exotic for Warlocks. Some of the key points to walk away from this with is it's a subclass neutral exotic, it marks targets for you, and it slightly increases airborne effectiveness of all weapons. So in an ironic way, Eye of Another World's niche is that it doesn't really have a niche. It's just a solid boost on any subclass and in any activity that you could be doing. All that to say, I don't think Eye of Another World is a really bad exotic, but I definitely think it could use a little bit more spice, particularly in its marking of enemy targets. In PvP, the marking works just fine. It grants a red outline when enemies are below about 50% of their health, or outlines them in yellow if they have their super ready. But in PvE, this effect was really not that noticeable. And also, there's no play loop or really any reason for it to mark targets in the first place. So my idea would be to update the Cerebral Uplink perk with the following. Highlights priority targets and improves the regeneration speed of your grenade, melee, and rift abilities. This effect is increased upon killing a marked target. Provides a small benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. So like I said in my ground rules, I'm not going to be overhauling the exotic entirely. But what I am going to change is Eye of Another World's marking capability, which I think could be doing a little bit more. I know it's on a completely different class, but hunters do have the on the prowl aspect, which allows them to mark targets upon going invisible. I think that aspect could be tweaked and copied over directly into Eye of Another World, where instead of marking a target upon going into invisibility, Eye of Another World would mark targets based on their health. At base, it would still do exactly what it does now, giving you a nice healthy bump in your regeneration rate of all of your abilities. But upon dropping an enemy to half health, this will mark that target. Killing that marked target would give you a huge bump in your ability regeneration rates. There would have to be some sort of internal cooldown to keep the ability spam in line, but other than that, this would turn Eye of Another World into a target hunting minigame. I don't think this change would put it on the top of any sort of charts when it comes to Warlock exotics. But I do think this change keeps it pretty consistent with its old iterations, as well as giving it a small lethality bump to help it stand its ground against other exotics in its category. At the very least, I think the marking aspect needs a small change in PvE. Moving on to our next helmet, we have the Stag, which comes with the perk Dearly Departed. Your Rift provides damage reduction to allied guardians standing in it, grants Rift energy when you are critically wounded, on your death, creates a healing rift on your corpse. The Stag has got to be one of the coolest looking exotics for Warlocks in my opinion, and the damage reduction it gives you upon Riftcast is actually really nice to have. There's actually only one change I would make to this perk, and I'll explain my reasoning after I read the new perk I gave the Stag. My suggestion for the new Dearly Departed perk reads as follows. Your Rift provides damage reduction to allied guardians standing in it. Grants Rift energy when you are critically wounded or when reviving an ally. On your death, creates a healing rift on your corpse. So not a huge change. I personally am not a huge fan of benefiting from my exotics when I'm critically wounded. In a lot of activities, I prefer to keep my health as topped off as possible, and so being critically wounded really doesn't do a whole lot for me in these exotic perks. But this perk has been so ingrained into the Stag's identity that I didn't want to change it outright. So instead, I just took a page from the perk's namesake and added Rift Energy Regeneration on reviving an ally as well as when you're critically wounded. This change should keep it in its support Rift role while also granting it additional ways to regen your Rift energy. So like I said earlier, not a huge change, but the Stag really doesn't need much, and I think the Rift energy gained for reviving an ally is just absolutely perfect with this exotic's theming. And as for the class item, the change that I made affects the part of the exotic that doesn't relate to the class item, so there's no need for any changes there. The next exotic I wanted to touch base on was Apotheosis Veil. Veil comes with the perk Insatiable, which reads, immediately regenerate health, melee, grenade, and rift energy for you and your nearby allies upon activating your super. After your super ends, temporarily gain increased melee and grenade regen. Apotheosis is interesting because I see this exotic all of the time in class item form. The helmet, on the other hand, I rarely see out in the wild. And I realize that's because the main part of its perk, the perk that's left behind on just the helmet version, really isn't all that great. So for just the helmet of Apotheosis, not the class item, I have added to the perk Insatiable. Immediately regenerate health, melee, grenade, and rift energy for you and your nearby allies upon activating your super. After your super ends, temporarily gain greatly increased melee and grenade regen. Grenade kills grant bonus super energy. For the helmet of Apotheosis Veil, I wanted to bring a little more neutral game into this super focused exotic. A lot of other super exotics are leaning this direction, and so I thought Apotheosis could receive the same treatment. Grenade kills granting super energy pairs perfectly with every single subclass, and keeps Apotheosis Veil's subclass neutrality. And the super energy gained doesn't even have to be all that much. It could be close, if not a little higher than Ashes to Assets, and it would still be a welcome benefit to Apotheosis Veil. Hopefully this change to Insatiable would push more people towards Apotheosis Veil as a helmet more than they will a class item. It's not a huge change, but I think this change aligns itself perfectly with what Apotheosis Veil is trying to accomplish. Speaking of small changes making a big difference, the next Warlock exotic that I would like to take a look at is the Winter's Guile, which comes with the perk Warlord's Sigil. Defeating targets with melee attacks increases your melee damage. Targets frozen by Penumbral Blast automatically shatter. This exotic is super straightforward, pairs great with glaive builds, and is just a good exotic. But the one change I'm going to make for it is kind of a no-brainer change, and I'm surprised Bungie hasn't done this already. There's no need for me to reread the new or updated exotic perk on this thing, because the only change I would make to it is to add a meter system like we have with Wormgod Caress. Winter's Guile still functions on a timer system rather than a meter system like Wormgod. On top of that, both Wormgod Caress and Winter's Guile both cap out at the same exact damage buff. Their functions are virtually identical, one just has a meter system and the other still uses a timer system that immediately falls off when the timer hits 0. So super small change. Again, I'm shocked that Bungie hasn't done this sooner, but I would love to see the meter system hit Winter's Guile the same way it hit Wormgod Caress. The next exotic I would like to take a look at on this list is the Claws of Ahamkara. Claws comes with the perk The Whispers, which reads, gain an additional melee charge. Powered melee final blows spawn an orb of power. In a similar vein to Apotheosis Veil, I think the base exotic of Claws of Ahamkara could use a little bit of love to push them over the class item version of Claws of Ahamkara. Additional melee charges are great, and the intrinsic heavy-handed mod embedded into the claws is also really nice. But I think there are a couple of things we can add to the base version of Claws of Ahamkara to make it stand out from its class item counterpart. So to reiterate, these changes will not be affecting the class item, but here is the new version of the Whispers. Gain an additional melee charge. Powered melee final blows spawn an orb of power. Final blows with other abilities return melee energy, which can overflow to create additional charges when full. I took a lot of inspiration for this change from the Radiant Dance machines from the Hunter, but instead of boosting your dodge regeneration, Claws of Ahamkara will now do the same but for Warlock melees. It still functions the exact same at base and it will provide you an additional melee charge, but if you hold on to your melees and use other abilities to kill enemies, it gives you escalating chances to generate more charges of your melee. This change easily helps Claws of Ahamkara stand apart from its class item counterpart, and also gives it a really fun play loop to build into. I loved coming up with this idea. I hope Bungie does something to Claws of Ahamkara soon because I think they look great and I think the exotic as a whole is a really cool idea. Moving on, we have the Nothing Manacles, which come with the perk Scatter Charge. You gain an additional Scatter Grenade charge. Enables tracking for Scatter Grenade projectiles. I'll be honest with you guys, when I ran around to test this exotic for this video, I felt really underwhelmed by this exotic. The tracking Scatter Grenade charges somehow felt worse than just throwing a base Scatter Grenade. I know it's really baked into the identity of the exotic, but the whole reason I take a Scatter Grenade is for instant damage upon cast. The tracking added to the Scatter Grenade just feels like it slows it down, and the extra charge really doesn't do anything for me either. So to help out the overall feeling of this exotic while not changing it too much, I've updated the Scatter Charge perk to read, you gain an additional Scatter Grenade charge. Enables tracking for Scatter Grenade projectiles. Collecting Void Breaches grants Scatter Grenade damage. Your Scatter Grenade becomes shield piercing, stunning barrier champions. I took a page out of Lucky Raspberry's book for this change, and I'm really happy with the result. The base functionality of Nothing Manacles remains exactly the same. You still get an extra charge, and it still tracks the exact same way for Scatter Grenade projectiles. But whereas in Lucky Raspberry you get your grenade back faster upon jolting or picking up ionic traces, Void Warlocks historically have not had that big of a deal recharging their grenade energy. Devour does that for them so fast. So instead, I'm opting to help out the slower feeling playstyle of this grenade by increasing its damage when you pick up Void Breaches. So just like Lucky Raspberry can stun Overload champions and Ashen Wake can stop Unstoppable champions, I've opted to have Nothing Manacles be able to pierce and stop anti-barrier champions, which totally completes the trifecta between the classes. All in all, I think I still would prefer the base version of the Scatter Grenade, but if Nothing Manacles starts to boost that Scatter Grenade damage by picking up nothing but Void Breaches, then I might consider picking it up and running around with Nothing Manacles again. The next exotic on our list is the Ballidorse Wrathweavers. Ballidorse comes with the perk Hearts of Ice, which reads, targets frozen by your Winter's Wrath super take increased shatter damage. Allies in range of your Winter's Wrath Shockwave and Frost Pulse gain frost armor and deal increased damage with stasis weapons. Granting these buffs to allies grants you super energy. Bungie has changed these exotics a lot in the past couple of notes. It's obvious that they're really trying to make something happen with the Ballidorse, but nothing is really sticking to my knowledge. Other than some bugs here and there that have really boosted its potency to bug levels, the Ballidorse really haven't taken off that much. I personally don't really know how to help with that. I'm not a huge fan of the Wrathweavers myself. However, I did have an idea for a small change in its wording that I would love to see the Wrathweavers make. The new Hearts of Ice perk would read, targets frozen by you take increased shatter damage. Allies in range of your Winter's Wrath Shockwave and Frost Pulse gain frost armor and deal increased damage with stasis weapons. Granting these buffs to allies grants you super energy. While Wrathweavers is already a fantastic exotic, I decided to make it so that all shatter damage with this exotic equipped is increased, in a similar vein to what Dawn Chorus does for Scorch. This change would keep the base version of the Wrathweavers intact, while also boosting its neutral game to make the exotic feel a little more worthwhile. Personally, I love this change, and I would love to see Bungie do something like this with the Wrathweavers in the future. Next on our list is the Wings of Sacred Dawn. Wings comes with the perk Tome of Dawn, which reads, while you have a solar super equipped, aiming weapons while you're midair suspends you there for a short time, reducing incoming flinch and granting damage resistance. Weapon hits extend this effect's duration, and weapon final blows reload your solar weapons from reserves. Provides a large benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. So this exotic has a paragraph of information, and I'll be honest, none of it is very good. I've seen some absolutely amazing plays made with it in PvP, PvP, but in PvE, Wings of Sacred Dawn really aren't that great, and you really don't want to suspend yourself in the air for any sort of time in any sort of endgame activity. The damage resistance is nice, but again, Wings of Sacred Dawn falls behind so many other exotics in my opinion. I wanted to bump the lethality of Wings of Sacred Dawn in PvE, while also keeping it the exact same for those PvP players who like to float in the air and snipe me from across the world. So I have added this to Tome of Dawn. While you have a solar super equipped, aiming weapons while you're midair suspends you there for a short time, reducing incoming flinch and granting damage resistance. Weapon hits extend this effect's duration, weapon final blows reload your solar weapons from reserves, and provides a stacking damage buff against combatants. Provides a large benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. The key word in that new paragraph of a perk would be the stacking damage buff against combatants. I think if you're going to put yourself into the air for any sort of time in any sort of endgame PvE activity, you should be rewarded with some extra damage against combatants. This will do nothing for its PvP viability, it will function the exact same in order to keep it in touch, but in PvE, I genuinely think that Wings of Sacred Dawn could absolutely use some sort of weapon buff against combatants. There has to be something like that there for Wings of Sacred Dawn, otherwise the risk-reward ratio of this exotic just isn't really there. But overall, this one's a really tough one to touch, as it's a really niche exotic, and I'd be curious to know if anyone genuinely uses this in PvE. Moving on, we have the Phoenix Protocol, which comes with the exotic perk Battle Hearth. Kills and assists you make while standing in your Well of Radiance returns super energy. Now let me be clear, Phoenix Protocol is a really solid exotic. I honestly wouldn't change all that much about it. That being said, I do want to add a small bit of neutral game to this super exotic in order to add a bit of fun factor when you're not sitting in your well. So its new Battle Hearth perk would read something like, kills and assists you make while standing in your Well of Radiance return super energy. Healing allies grants a damage boost to your weapons and abilities. And to clarify, this weapon boost doesn't have to be anything crazy. I'm thinking a small boost like the damage boost a support auto rifle gives you after you've healed an ally. Just like the point I made with Apotheosis Veil, I think a lot of super exotics would really benefit from having some neutral game tie-ins in their exotic perk. Healing allies granting you a damage boost just seems super on point for the theming and pacing of Phoenix Protocol. But if anyone at Bungie is listening, I would love to see a lot of super exotics that are purely super exotics get some more neutral game tie-ins. Last on our list is the Promethium Spur, which comes with the perk Embers of Light. Daybreak final blows create a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. While a solar super is equipped, solar weapon final blows grant rift energy. Standing in a rift increases this energy. Final blows while in a rift consume class ability energy to create a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. This exotic perk is kind of a mouthful, but let me simplify it a bit for you. Basically, solar weapons will give you rift energy, but when you're standing in a rift and kill an enemy with a solar weapon, it consumes your class energy and creates a healing and empowering rift on the target's body. But let me ask you guys seriously, when was the last time you saw Promethium Spur anywhere? And it's honestly really sad when you think about it, because this exotic should be and could be a really fun and cool play loop that I just do not see people use at all. And I'll be honest, I may have gone a tad overboard with this one, but I genuinely think this exotic needs some help in the lethality department, and I think my change can definitely help it do that. The new Embers of Light perk should read, Daybreak final blows create an ignition and a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. While a solar super is equipped, solar weapon final blows grant rift energy. Standing in a rift increases this energy. Final blows while in a rift consume class ability energy to create an ignition and a healing and empowering rift at the target's location. Alright, I know it's a lot, but please hear me out before you click off. The big problem that I ran into when testing Promethium Spur was I couldn't kill things fast enough in order to proc my healing and empowering rift. And when I did proc it, by the time I got over to the rift to generate more energy, it was already pretty much gone. This exotic needs some lethality bump, and I think if you're going to spend your class ability energy in order to create that rift at location, it should come alongside an ignition on kill. I don't think this is busted or as overpowered as I'm making it seem, because in reality, if you're gonna sacrifice your rift energy for an ignition, I think that's totally a fine trade-off. This exotic has so much potential, I would just love to see Bungie put a little more lethality into Promethium Spur in order to let it shine. But with Promethium Spur out of the way, that is my exotic list for this episode. What did you guys think of my list? What did you think of my changes? Did I miss any exotics that you think should be updated? Let me know in the comments down below, as I really do read over those quite frequently. Again, big shoutouts to the clanmates who helped me formulate these ideas. I could not have made this video without you guys. And to my viewers, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really do appreciate it if you've made it this far. I have similar videos cooking up for both Titans and Hunters and exotic weapons in the future, and would love to know what changes you would make to some underused exotics in those classes as well. But anyway guys, that'll do it for me. Thanks again so much for watching. I'm excited to make those videos and I hope to see you in them as well.